Today marks 1 year since the release of the astounding Dead Space Remake. After being dormant for over a decade, we finally have more Dead Space content. The Dead Space franchise was always a personal favorite of ours. The series has multiple games, including a phone game titled Dead Space Mobile. They even made 2 animated films where one was a prequel to the first game, and a second film that was a prequel to the second game. They even had books and comics based on Dead Space that told great stories. Dead Space Martyr in particular, which was a fine read. We were sad to see Dead Space fall out after the 3rd installment of the franchise, but with this new remake being a commercial success, we're excited to see what the future holds for this sci-fi nightmare of a franchise. As to why the Dead Space remake was worth the wait and definitely deserved of a remake, the Dead Space remake makes changes and adds more background to certain characters, some even being new faces such as some of the people in Isaac's Kelly and crew. We also got to experience new mechanical features and get a sense of playing how we want. One thing that was exciting to find out going into the remake was that Isaac Clarke was actually gonna speak. In the original he grunts but never utters a word. Right at the start of the game you find a long and detailed file on Isaac's early life, along with going into detail about his mother and father. In the original it was just a basic mini med pack in that location. We knew going into the Dead Space remake that sound design was a major importance for Motive, and we watched all the streams that they did prior to the game's launch, with them going into detail ranging from noises being heard behind walls, Isaac's breathing patterns varying depending on his health state, or even trying to gain composure after a fairly long run. It was also dependent on Isaac's age. You can even hear Isaac's heartbeat rapidly after a traumatic encounter with a necromorph, or seeing dead people on the floor. Hearing noises throughout the Ishimura made us turn around from time to time, not gonna lie. The lighting is also superb. There were times when we'd be weary moving forward because it was so damn dark, which added a lot of tension during our playthrough. On top of that, Motive also added a system to where every playthrough was unique, with some spawns being different in multiple locations. We've had multiple playthroughs on this game, and there were times where we were being attacked in places that were fairly calm. To go along with the great sound design, lighting, spawn changes, and the chilling music that was composed for this game made it a beautifully tense and horrifying experience. The combat felt great as well. For example, using my plasma cutter or pulse rifle made me feel in control of my actions. Upgrading your weapons and finding nodes were also done well, just like in the original game. They also implemented the roaming feature in Zero Gravity, which was limited in Dead Space until Dead Space 2. As a side note, we always thought the original Dead Space was a perfect game. They took what made the original from 2008 great and just added upon it. We said before that they made some changes story-wise compared to the original. We're not going to dive too much into the lore because we plan to make future videos based around the Dead Space franchise that focus on certain topics and dive into the lore in its entirety. One thing we will say that was a great change that didn't affect anything negatively was the part where Isaac has to shoot down asteroids in Chapter 4. We remember getting destroyed so many times in the original, but in the remake they took a different approach that was more tolerable.
They even added side missions the more you progress through the story. Once certain missions are completed, you can unravel another pretty important part of the story revolving around Isaac and Nicole, who is his girlfriend. Easter eggs are teased throughout the campaign that hint towards sequels like Dead Space 2 and even 3. They even added a New Game Plus run that can give you an alternate ending if you are able to find marker fragments throughout the game. There are 12 in total, just like how many chapters there are. By finding all 12, you can even get changes in dialogue towards the end of the campaign. It's well worth the experience. Now going into the designs of the enemies. Seeing the necromorphs with next-gen graphics is such a delight. The slashers, lurkers, infectors, leapers, brutes, dividers, twitchers, wheezers, and the anxiety-inducing hunter, who has a story of his own, definitely got us on the edge of our seat plenty of times. Even the Leviathan was an experience to be remembered, especially since they made us fight him again later on, replacing the slug boss from the original, making it a second encounter with the Leviathan instead. They even added growths of the infection spread throughout the ship that wasn't even in the original Dead Space. Throughout our playthrough, we had to think about making certain choices if we wanted to sacrifice our oxygen for the lights or vice versa. Making choices like these made it stressful, especially when you had necromorphs on your tail. We've played the original Dead Space multiple times, so seeing the same locations again gave us a sense of familiarity and nostalgia, but at the same time it felt fresh. The team at Motive knew that players would recognize the places and even changed puzzles and relocated the Pang treasure. You can backtrack and use the tram to go anywhere you want on the ship, whether it be to do side missions or open certain doors that were locked to get loot. Overall, this remake was definitely made for people who cared about the source material and put all they could into it. It's definitely worth a play if you haven't already. With the series finally back and due to the success of the first game being remade, we can eventually get a remake of Dead Space 2 and 3, with an eventual Dead Space 4 if they're willing to make Dead Space an even longer running series than prior. It was stated that Motive are down to moving forward with the series, so we're sure within the coming years we'll get an announcement for a Dead Space 2 remake. We love this game and adore the franchise so much and couldn't be happier with how this remake turned out to be. Even a whole year later, this game is just as enjoyable as our initial playthrough was for it. That's all for this video. If you enjoyed, hit that like button, comment down below, and with that being said, have a good day.